probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings.
The crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer made the world cringe. 17 murders. Cannibalism. Sex with the dead. A man who made his Milwaukee apartment into a violent and erotic death chamber.
One thing led to another. It took more and more deviant type behaviors to satisfy my urges.
Dahmer even tried to create living sex zombies by injecting acid into their brains. Jeffrey Dahmer, it seemed, was as close to raw evil as the world had ever known.
Jeffrey thought he was the devil. Jeffrey thought he was so evil that he was equal to the devil.
The first child of Joyce and Lionel Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, just before their first anniversary. His name was Jeffrey.
It was a very happy time when Jeff was first born, and for a couple of months it was like everything was brand new and very, very enjoyable and happy, looking forward to the future.
While Jeff's father pursued his chemistry degree, Jeff grew into a bright and loving child.
He was very exuberant. He liked to wrestle. He liked to run around and ham it up for the camera. And he liked to play with kids. He liked to get together with them. And he was very outgoing.
Jeff was also an extremely curious child.
He seemed to want to play with things and feel things and get to know their texture, and he seemed to be very much in tune with what's around him. He just wanted to know what was going on.
He had a fascination with animals as a youngster. Once 4-year-old Jeff watched his father collect the bones of small animals that had died under the house.
I brought him out, put him in a metal pail just to collect them all in one place, and they dropped in with sort of a clanking noise, and Jeff seemed kind of interested in that noise, and he took a hold and let him drop down in too. You know, in retrospect, everything looks grim and dark and sinister. You know, like, could that be the start of something evil? Well, I have to admit, it's simply just the curiosity of a child.
Lionel finished his schooling with a PhD in chemistry. The family moved to Ohio, relocating 3 times before settling down on a nearly 2-acre wooded lot in the town of Bath, an hour's drive south of Cleveland. It was then that Lionel began to notice the previously gregarious Jeff had become shy and withdrawn.
He did seem to be awkward socially and just didn't feel comfortable.
To take his mind off the move, 7-year-old Jeff was given a dog, Frisky, whom he loved dearly.
With people that he knew or his new pet, the next door neighbor boy, he was very relaxed. But there was this shyness and feeling of inferiority that we were concerned about at that time.
What the Dahmers thought their son needed was to feel more involved, so they let Jeff choose the name of their second son. Jeff named his brother David. Lionel also encouraged his son to participate in activities that would include contact with other kids.
What we were trying to do was to involve Jeff with that activities with the thought that involvement would lead to human involvement, a forced, almost, interaction.
And on the weekends, father and son planted gardens and raised sheep for competition in 4-H fairs. To commemorate their gardening days, young Jeff gave his father a handmade card with a poem.
There's a picture of me eating an ear of corn on the front, and Jeff says, "The squash and the pumpkins can never compare to the kind of dad who has curly hair." And it says, "This poem is from Jeff, and I love you to death."
When Jeff was 10, his mother was hospitalized and treated for anxiety. From there, his parents' marriage began to fail. Jeff's fascination with nature and small animals continued into his teenage years when he became curious about what they looked like on the inside. For specimens, he collected roadkill. Riding around the country roads in Bath, carrying garbage bags, Jeff searched for carcasses. Jeff brought the roadkill he found into the backyard of the house, and there in the secrecy of the woods, he dissected the animals.
I really have become convinced that that was sort of the starting point in this downward spiral of his. And it was associated with his puberty. And when you have hormones kicking into this terrible mixture, what he's doing, he's investigating insides of animals. And his sexuality was developing at the same time.
Teenage Jeff was discovering that he felt sexually attracted only to men. But the thoughts of sex with men became interlocked with fantasies of killing another man and dismemberment. The fantasies excited him, but they were unspeakable.
I think it was around age 14 or 15. Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't. I just kept it all inside.
The fantasies included lying next to an unconscious man. For the first time, Jeff's fantasies crossed the line from his mind into action. He devised a plan. He would knock out a local jogger with a bat and lie next to him. On the day he opted to wait for his victim, the jogger didn't run by. He never attempted the clubbing a second time. As he entered high school, his sexual fantasies traumatized him. To escape, he began drinking. On the way to classes in the morning, he would fill up a cup with hard liquor at a friend's house.
And I remember sitting next to him in a first period, I believe, history class, and he had a styrofoam cup of scotch, I believe it was scotch. I remember saying, "Jeff, what is that?" And he threw his head back and he shook it and he said, "It's my medicine." But clearly he was getting drunk at 8 o'clock in the morning.
At home, Jeff was watching his parents' marriage dissolve. When their bickering escalated to open fighting, he retreated to the forested backyard, slapping tree trunks with sticks.
I'd leave the house, go out in the woods and sulk, brooding, wondering why they had to have such a rough relationship.
He remained aloof with few interests and no close friendships, but he still seemed to have a sense of humor. On the high school tennis team, Jeff spent most of his time goofing around rather than playing a serious game. But more often than not, the jokes were at Jeff's expense. He gained a reputation as the class clown. Acting out in a bizarre or unexpected manner became known at his school as, quote, doing a Dahmer.
All of a sudden you'd be walking down the hall and you'd hear someone yelling and hollering and running through the hallway, and it's Jeff Dahmer in the middle of the day, running, flapping his arms, yelling, hurricane drill, everybody hide.
At one point, Jeff collected money from classmates in exchange for a show at the mall.
And a woman is handing out samples of sunflower seeds, and Jeff is taking one and then another and being very polite like he always was, and then just spits them out all over the place and starts yelling at the top of his lungs, "I'm allergic, I'm allergic, I'm allergic," and runs away.
During his junior year, Jeff went along on a school-sponsored trip to Washington, D.C.
And Jeff said, "I have an idea, let's go see the vice president." And we sort of all laughed and said, "Yes, sure, the vice president."
Jeff went to a payphone. When he returned, he announced that they would be seen in the office of Vice President Walter Mondale in 2 hours.
He had explained that we were high school students from Ohio working on our school newspaper, and we were in town for a week, and could we come and talk to someone in the vice president's office?
His slick talking worked. Dahmer had gotten his classmates inside the executive office building to meet with Mondale. In the classroom, Jeff was something of a model student.
Very polite to adults, dressed very nice, very respectful to teachers. did his work. He could be an A student if he wanted to. Other times he would fail a class because he had no interest. He could be very polite with very good manners. Yes, sir. No, sir, when he spoke with teachers.
He was perfecting his ability to fool authority figures. But as time went on, Jeff became less interested in his performance at school.
No one really knew what was going on in his mind. He didn't open up to anybody. He didn't have any close friends. And he had really slipped away from his social life the older we got in high school.
At the school near Bath, Ohio, Jeffrey remained an alcoholic outcast. His behavior was the subject of mockery from other students.
I don't think he connected, he didn't engage with people. So if you don't engage with people, then you, give and take of conversation and feelings, then you end up internalizing a lot. You fantasize a lot. And then the next step is to think that some of those fantasies may be real.
A step Jeff was ready to make. He would kill his first victim just after high school graduation. For Jeffrey Dahmer, the summer of 1978 started with high school graduation. It would be downhill from there. His parents, after years of open and bitter fighting, divorced. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, moved out of the family house in Bath, Ohio, and into this nearby motel. Unbeknownst to Lionel, Jeff's mother took younger brother David and moved to Wisconsin. Jeffrey found himself home alone. Jeffrey was 18, and like most teens his age, he had active sexual fantasies. But Jeffrey's deviated from the norm to include thoughts of killing his lover. Now the isolation of the empty family home gave him the opportunity to act out those fantasies. Just weeks after graduation, Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker along the road. It was 18-year-old Stephen Hicks.
I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. Turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality.
Jeffrey invited Hicks back to the house. They drank beers and spent a couple of hours just hanging out. Then Hicks said he had to go, but Jeffrey didn't want to be alone. He attacked Hicks, knocking him out with a barbell, and then he strangled him. Dahmer had fulfilled his fantasy, but he was lucid enough to know that he had committed a murder. He quickly began to hide the evidence. He dismembered Hicks' body with a knife, a skill he had practiced as a younger teen with roadkill. He put the pieces into trash bags and loaded them into his car in the middle of the night. He was heading for a dump site when he was pulled over by the police for drifting across the center line. The officers asked Jeff what was in the bags and why he was out so late. Jeff was trapped for the first time, but he was ready with a lie. He coolly told the cops he was troubled by his parents' divorce and couldn't sleep, so he thought a trip to the dump would take his mind off things. The police let him go with a ticket. Jeff returned home, racked with guilt over the murder. He stashed the bones of Stephen Hicks under the house for 2 weeks. Then he smashed them to bits with a sledgehammer. Behind the house, Jeff spun in a circle, tossing the fragments among the leaves and brush. In August, Jeffrey's father stopped by the house.
I said, "Where is your mother? Where's Dave?" And he said, "They're gone." I said, "Well, what do you mean? They're gone, they've left."
Jeff's father moved back into the house. He encouraged Jeff to find a job. But Jeff wasn't interested. He spent his days drinking, even getting himself arrested for public intoxication. Lionel took his son to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and psychological counseling sessions. They had little impact. Nothing could erase the violence and terror his first murder had imprinted on his mind. Only the alcohol seemed to provide relief. By the end of the summer, Jeff was still jobless, so Lionel suggested an alternative: college. He enrolled Jeff at Ohio State. But Jeff spent the entire first quarter in a drunken stupor, selling his blood to plasma centers and spending the money on beer. Predictably, Dahmer flunked out and returned home.
I said, Jeff, the doors are closing. I think perhaps that the armed services might be something that you need.
Like all the other choices that had been made for him, Jeff passively went along with his enlistment. After his basic training was complete, he left for an army hospital in San Antonio, Texas, where he was given specialized instruction as a field medic. There, Dahmer learned more about human anatomy. For one of the first times in his life, he was excited about what he was doing, responding to instruction and discipline. After 6 months in the Army, his sluggish body had become lean and strong. Normally shy and reclusive, Jeff became outgoing, even smiling. But the mood swing was temporary. The Army sent him for a tour of duty in Germany, and there, once again, Jeff emptied bottle after bottle. His superiors noticed and gave Dahmer an early discharge. He went directly to Miami Beach without contacting his family. He worked in a sandwich shop and lived out of a motel. When his booze bills exceeded the room costs, Jeff took to sleeping on the beach.
And he was terrified one night when a rat, big, huge rat, came crawling over him, and he called us. He said, he needs some money. I said, we won't send you money, but we'll send you a ticket. You come home. So I met him at the airport, Cleveland Hopkins Airport, and he had a smile on his face. But as I got closer, it wasn't a smile of happiness, it was a smile of inebriation.
Lionel tried for a year to help his alcoholic son, to no avail. Jeff was sent to stay with his father's mother near Milwaukee. There, he seemed to find some stability at last, making a concentrated effort to turn his life around. He stopped drinking, went to church with his grandmother, and he fought what he believed were immoral homosexual urges, which eventually led to his inescapable fantasies about murder. Dahmer even found jobs, first at a blood bank and then working nights as a chocolate mixer in a candy factory. But the lifestyle of church-going and right living, as he called it, didn't last. After 3 quiet years in his grandmother's home, Jeff came face to face with his fears. At the library, a man handed him a note offering sexual favors. Dahmer declined, but he would later say the note was a turning point. It awakened sexual desires deep inside him. Specifically, he wanted the submissive company of another male. He wanted someone to fulfill his sexual needs, but he didn't want to be burdened by anyone else's needs. Jeffrey started with a perfectly submissive partner. He stole a store window mannequin. He kept the plastic man in his closet, bringing it out to masturbate onto until his grandmother found it and insisted he get rid of it. On his free nights, Jeffrey began exploring gay life in Milwaukee, browsing through porn shops and going to bathhouses. The bath clubs catered mostly to men seeking anonymous sex. To make his partners there submissive, Jeffrey gave them drinks laced with sleeping pills. When they fell unconscious, he would lie down next to them, listening to the sounds of their bodies, their heartbeats, their stomachs. But the drugging experiments ended when one man overdosed and spent a week in the hospital. Jeff was asked never to return to the club. But he then discovered the gay bars and discos of Milwaukee. These would become the killer's favorite hunting grounds. By his late 20s, Jeffrey Dahmer was settled in Milwaukee, living at his grandmother's and prowling the city's gay scene. No one suspected that this reclusive loner with boyish good looks was on his way to becoming a psychopathic serial killer.
He did take pleasure in the fact that he was in control of his own little world, that nobody knew what was going on, that he was the master of it.
Dahmer could fit in with any group, and you wouldn't say, oh, he must be crazy, or he must be a killer. That's why he was so successful. He was not a repulsive individual.
Certainly not in Milwaukee's gay nightclubs.
We have it on good facts that he was considered somewhat of a honey in the gay community, that people found him attractive. Several people told us that he was the kind of guy that you wanted to take care of, you wanted to baby him.
But Dahmer had very specific requirements for his men.
He chose a body style. He liked long, lean, smooth, muscular body styles. And it didn't matter if they were black, white, yellow, red, or brown. If he found them attractive, he would try to get them.
In November 1987, Dahmer met 25-year-old Steve Toomey at a downtown club called 219. After a few drinks, they left the bar for a night at the nearby Ambassador Hotel. Dahmer used an old trick to get Toomey into the submissive state he craved.
I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him conscious. And was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed, and I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have.
But Dahmer didn't panic. He went out and bought the biggest suitcase he could find. At the hotel, he crammed Toomey's body into the case, dragged it into a taxi, went back to his grandmother's house, and dismembered Toomey in the basement.
That's when the obsession went into full swing.
He decided after that second death that he would no longer attempt to control his desires, that he would give full rein to them, yield entirely to them, and after that his life became the pursuit of unmitigated sexual pleasure.
Dahmer now decided to pursue his fantasies of ultimate control. It was no longer enough to have his partners submissive just for a night. He wanted to keep them that way forever. So with the intent to murder and then butcher the men he picked up, Dahmer returned to the clubs. At a bus stop outside 219, he met 14-year-old James Doc Stater. Dahmer offered him $50 to spend the night with him. They took the bus back to Dahmer's grandmother's. While she slept, Jeff and Doc Stater had oral sex. Then Dahmer drugged and strangled him, his preferred method for killing.
He stated in no way did he ever want to hurt anybody. As funny as this sounds, that is the reason why he killed everyone by strangling them, because not only did he get the power and the thrill of committing the murder, but it was also the most humane way.
With Doc Stater, Dahmer further explored his dark fantasies. He hid the body in the basement for a week and continued to have sex with it.
Most serial killers are sexual deviants who are social and psychological sociopaths and sexual-paths who kill people for their own sexual gratification. Dahmer's was different than that. He was a true necrophiliac. He was trying to have sex with an unconscious or dead person.
Once James Doc Stater began to decay, Dahmer dismembered him in the basement near a floor drain, just as he had with Toomey. Dahmer was now drinking heavily again, especially on the nights he'd planned to murder. By the time he killed, he would be stone drunk.
He drank because his conscience was so strong. This isn't a man that didn't know the difference of right from wrong.
2 months after killing Doc Stater, Dahmer picked up 21-year-old Richard Guerrero from a Milwaukee bar, again offering him money to spend the night. In a familiar pattern, Dahmer drugged and strangled him. He spent a few hours with the corpse before dismembering it. He then placed the body parts into trash bags for the city garbage collection the next day. In the summer of 1988, Jeff's grandmother asked him to move out. She had been troubled by Jeff's late hours, the mannequin in his bedroom, and now unidentified foul smells from the basement. He took an apartment on Milwaukee's west side and immediately accelerated his downward spiral when he approached a 13-year-old boy on the street and lured him into the apartment. Inside, Dahmer scared the boy by fondling him, and the youngster ran from the apartment. Dahmer was convicted on second-degree sexual assault charges only. The murders were still his secret. He was sentenced to 1 year in a work release program that required him to spend his nights in a prison dormitory while he continued working at the chocolate factory. In the 10 days before he began his sentence, Dahmer struck again. He met 26-year-old Anthony Sears at the gay club La Cage and killed him. He mummified Sears' head and genitals and kept them inside his locker at the chocolate factory. Towards the end of the work release term, Jeff's father wrote to the judge and urged him to put Jeff in an alcoholic treatment program, writing, "I have tremendous reservations regarding Jeff's chances when he hits the streets." No program was ordered. Jeff was released 2 months early. He moved into another low-income neighborhood in Milwaukee. The rent at the Oxford Apartments was cheap, and the location was close to the gay clubs. On his own again, he was free to feed his relentless sexual urges. Within 3 weeks of his release, Dahmer began a 1-year killing frenzy. He would leave 13 more families, most of them African-American, searching for loved ones who had simply disappeared. The police, too, searched in vain.
Once Jeff started on his killing spree, all of his financial resources, all of his time, money, effort, desires, emotions, thoughts went into his secret world of killing people and keeping them with him. Many times he talked about trying to fight it, even after he had killed a couple people, saying how he wasn't going to do it again, but within a month he would be back out at the bar stalking.
One victim almost got away. Dahmer had drugged 14-year-old Konorak Synthesomphone, the brother of the boy Dahmer had been jailed for molesting the year before. As Konorak slept, Dahmer went out to buy more liquor. But while he was gone, the teen woke up. He staggered out into the street naked. A concerned neighbor called 911.
Milwaukee Emergency Operator 71.
Okay, hi. I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt.
Police arrived. By this time, Dahmer had returned from his beer run. As he had with police in Bath, Ohio after his first killing, Dahmer smoothly lied. He told police that Konorak was his gay lover who simply had too much to drink. He brought the cops into his apartment and showed them Polaroids he'd taken of the teen, proof, he said, of their relationship. The police believed the 14-year-old was of legal age and left him behind with Dahmer. They wrote the incident off as a lover's quarrel. Again, Dahmer had been slippery enough to keep his killings a secret. As soon as the cops left, he murdered the boy. Inside Dahmer's apartment, the bodies began to pile up. So he bought a 57-gallon drum and filled it with a powerful acid to dissolve the dismembered limbs and torsos. After weeks in the acid, the remains of Dahmer's would-be lovers became sludge, which he flushed down the toilet or the bathtub drain. For others, Jeffrey boiled the skin off their bones on the stove. A sweet, bitter odor of death began to infest the building, and many tenants traced the smells straight to Dahmer's door.
It's awful funny. Whatever Jeff was cooking, Jeff never bought no groceries. So what could he have been cooking that smelled like chitlins? Chitlins have a very peculiar, nasty odor to them, you know.
Dahmer was pathologically lonesome, not wanting his sexual partners to leave him even after death. He took keepsake photos while removing their flesh and then preserved certain parts.
And one thing led to another. It took more and more deviant type behaviors to satisfy my urges.
He devised a plan to build a shrine out of skeletons and skulls, but he was still in search of the perfect partner, one who was completely submissive but alive and not prone to decay. On a few still living victims, Dahmer used a power drill to open small holes in their skulls. Then he injected acid into their brains. According to Dahmer, none of his experimental zombies lived longer than a day. And in perhaps the ultimate effort to keep his victims with him, Dahmer began eating their flesh.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
Throughout this year of ruthless killing, Dahmer still appeared outwardly normal. In this video, taken at his grandmother's house on Thanksgiving, Dahmer talked calmly with his father.
Well, you're looking good. Grandma was saying that she thought that you got quite a bit thinner, but you look fit. I don't know.
Well, I've been surviving mostly on McDonald's food. It's just so much easier just to pop into a restaurant. But
Yeah.
like I've said before, it gets too expensive, and
It does.
I have to start eating at home more.
It's amazing how he could sit there and appear like he's, you know, clean cut, nice jacket on, and talking very hopefully about his job, intelligent. It's amazing how much a human being can hide from another human being.
But careful as he was, Jeffrey Dahmer was about to run out of good lies. In July 1991, the city of Milwaukee discovered a serial killer, 31-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer. One man, Tracy Edwards, had managed to escape from the horrors of Dahmer's apartment and flag down a passing patrol car. When the officers entered the apartment, they found 83 Polaroids of bodies in various stages of dismemberment. There were more shocking discoveries in the kitchen.
There were 4 fully enfleshed skulls still there, sitting in a refrigerator. One of the officers said he opened the icebox. He heard a scream. It was only later that he realized that it was he himself who had screamed.
TV news cameras rolled as what was left of the victims was carried out. The 57-gallon drum filled with the torsos of 3 men. A freezer with dismembered limbs and flesh. Metal cooking pots with mummified hands and genitals. This time, there was no lie Dahmer could tell to save himself.
He was walking in a pretty defeated manner. His shoulders were hunched, his head was down, he was sweating profusely. He kind of had a faint, kind of a whining, like a baby crying noise about him.
At the police station, detectives began a marathon interview with the suspected killer. Dahmer at first blamed the booze instead of himself, saying he wouldn't have been caught if he hadn't been so drunk. But Dahmer was now clearly scared.
The look of terror and almost hysteria that he had on his face in the interrogation room that first night as he was coming down off the alcohol and finally realizing that the gig was up. He was caught. He did cry several times. He went into a rage. Besides asking to kill himself, he stood up and pounced around a couple times.
Once Dahmer sobered up, no one could guess at the gruesome details to follow.
He made this statement: when I tell you what I'm going to tell you, you're going to be famous. And I tried to say, look, Jeff, there's nothing that you can tell me that is going to freak me out. And he laughed at that. He said, you don't know what I've done.
Dahmer spent the next 6 weeks with the detectives, recounting the murders of 17 men, a 159-page confession. It seemed cathartic to Dahmer to finally get the deeds of the last 13 years off his chest. With the information from his confession, investigators went back to Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio. They raked up the shattered bones of Stephen Hicks, Dahmer's first victim. The Milwaukee County coroner started matching skulls with torsos, and the police began the sad task of notifying families. Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane. The issue of his sanity would be the sole question before the jury.
You know immediately that it's going to be probably an insanity defense. What can you argue? You can't claim self-defense. You can't say you don't know how those bodies got there.
Wisconsin had no death penalty, so if the jury found him sane, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. If they found him insane, he would be imprisoned in a mental facility. Dahmer himself couldn't understand why he enjoyed fantasizing about murder.
Jeffrey thought he was the devil. Jeffrey thought he was so evil that he was equal to the devil. And he knew there was something wrong with him, but he didn't know what it was, but he never categorized himself as being insane.
The man who entered the Milwaukee County courtroom in January 1992 appeared completely normal. until the words of his confession were read in court by Lieutenant Dennis Murphy.
He related this was a person he really liked. He indicated that he had filleted his heart and kept it in the freezer, and he also kept his bicep. He indicated that he had eaten the thigh muscle of this subject, but it was so tough he could hardly chew it. He then purchased a meat tenderizer and used it on the bicep.
Dahmer's father, Lionel, sat in the courtroom beside his second wife, Sherry, stunned by what he heard.
No one softened the blow for us. No one told us, no one prepared us with any of these details. How could this be? How could I have not known about it?
Dahmer's crimes seemed to be devastating proof of insanity. What else could explain the actions of a man who had sex with the dead, dismembered their bodies, preserved their skulls, and ate their flesh, all for sexual gratification? But the law has a very strict interpretation of insanity. Dahmer's defense team had to prove two things. One, that he indeed suffered from a mental disease, and that it kept him from knowing right from wrong. Necrophilia, a compulsion to have sex with the dead, is recognized as a sexual disorder, but it does not make one legally insane.
He argued that the necrophilic drive was such that he could not control it. But we don't accept that in the United States as a defense, no more than we accept a pedophilic drive of the man who...
Thomas Farrell's testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please be seated. Then, sir, would you tell us your name and spell your last name for us?
Tracy Edwards, E-D-W-A-R-D-S.
Mr. Edwards, you're going to ask you to speak up very loudly into the microphone. I would like to know, in what state do you reside at the present time?
Louisiana.
And how old are you, sir?
32.
32? And you are single?
Yes.
You were in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on July the 22nd, 1991?
Yes.
And at or about that time, on that late afternoon, did you have occasion to see a person that you knew at that time or subsequently learned was a fellow by the name of Jeffrey Dahmer?
Yes.
And you know that Mr. Dahmer you're speaking about is the defendant in this case to my right, correct?
Yes.
And that made a record show the identification.
Sir, would you indicate where Mr. Dahmer is seated in the courtroom?
He's over there.
Right in the middle between my two associates?
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
The record should reflect the defendant's been identified.
Now, Mr. Edwards, you and I met for the first time last evening.
Yes.
And you came up from Louisiana at my request with your attorney.
Right.
Mr. Saeed, S-Y-E-D, Salet, S-A-L-E-T.
That's correct.
And you came up here to testify to the events, as you recall them, that occurred on the late afternoon, early evening, early morning hours of July the 22nd and the morning of July the 23rd, 1991.
That's correct.
So that you know, Mr. Edwards, your name is known to the jury because there has been testimony concerning what happened to you and at the apartment of Mr. Dahmer. Do you understand?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Where did you know Mr. Dahmer by name prior to that date?
I've seen him a couple of times before then. I didn't know his name personally.
All right. Did you ever talk to him before that date?
Speaking to him, saying hello as he passed by. Yeah.
Just casual, friendly?
Casual, yeah, friendly.
Hellos?
Hellos, yeah.
Where was it that you saw him in the late afternoon, early morning hours of July the 22nd?
Grand Avenue Mall.
And that was in Milwaukee?
Correct.
Downtown on Wisconsin Avenue?
Wisconsin, correct.
Were you with somebody or were you alone?
A couple of her friends, yeah.
Okay, so the record is absolutely clear. You are not a homosexual, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay. So you were with a couple of your buddies, were you?
That's correct.
And what were you doing?
We was drinking beer, just talking, hanging out, you know.
About 6 o'clock at night, was this?
Yeah, about 6:15, whatever.
Did you have occasion then to see Mr. Dahmer?
Yeah, he approached us eventually and started talking to us, yeah.
Were you 3 black males?
Yeah, one white, 2 black male.
Okay. So you're friends?
Yeah, my best friend was white, yeah.
When he came up and started talking to you, what is it that Mr. Dahmer said to you?
He said he was just in the city from Chicago. He was taking care of her sick grandmother, I believe, in West Allis. Yeah.
And did he have any further conversation with you and your friends?
Yeah, he was just talking. He said he was a professional photographer. He usually pays people for pictures and stuff like that if anybody was interested in making money at that time.
To have to pose for pictures?
Yeah.
Did he describe the kind of pictures that you were going to be posing for if you chose to take him up on the offer?
He said nude.
Nude.
Right.
Now, after he said that to you, what did you and your friends do?
They were just talking, discussing it, you know, seeing what was going on, you know.
And what did you end up doing? Did you remain at Grand Avenue or did you go somewhere else?
We proceeded from there. He said he was going to buy all his guys beer, rum, and Coke, you know, watch videos or something like that.
Rum and Coke, did you say?
Yeah, we went to the liquor store on Wisconsin Avenue, 7th and Wisconsin Avenue.
So you walked from Grand Avenue down to 7th and Wisconsin?
Yeah, up, so to speak. Yeah,
At that
between
time-
5th and 6th, 7th, something like that. I'm not really sure.
The general area of 6th or
Right.
7th in Wisconsin. Was it going to be the three of you and Mr. Dahmer were going to stay together, or was it agreed upon that one or others of you were going to go with Mr. Dahmer, or was there no agreement?
They were going to meet up with us eventually later on that evening.
Meet up with who?
Jeffrey at his apartment, but he gave them the wrong address at that time.
Okay, so did you, the three of you and your two friends and Mr. Dahmer, walk down to a liquor store, and what happened when you got to the liquor store?
I saw my brother. We started talking. At this time, Jeff was talking to my other friends.
So you say you saw your brother. He wasn't one of the three that you were with?
No,
then?
no.
You saw him on the street?
Yeah. He approached
Okay, so
me.
you had conversation.
Right.
Okay, did anyone go into a liquor store and buy anything?
Mr. Dahmer brought liquor. Yeah.
So he went
and
into a
beer.
liquor store?
Right.
And when he came out, who was still there?
Okay. When he came out, we were all still there.
And then what happened? Tell us what happened then.
Okay, he was talking to them. Then we were gonna go up the street. I was gonna go home and change and everything at this time. So we proceeded. We caught a cab at the bus station, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what was your plan as you were in front of that liquor store after Mr. Dahmer came out with the liquor and you had been talking to your brother? What was your plan? What were you going to do? You say you were going to go home and change clothes?
Yeah, and eventually I was gonna go over there, you know, and maybe check out what he was talking about making the money at that time.
So your interest was in making some money?
Right.
Did he tell you how much you would be paid if you did pose for him?
He said $100 for
You
a
had
shot.
no idea, did you, that this was for any homosexual
No,
conduct?
he didn't come across like that, and he didn't even act like it at that time.
Okay. So now your friends are still there, and you're going to go home and you order a cab for the over at the bus depot. What happens? Tell us what happens.
Okay, and then me and Dahmer, my friends say they're gonna go and change and call up the girls, and we'll meet up later on, you know. Yeah.
Was there an address given as to where you were going?
He gave them some address that wasn't correct, you know.
You later found that out?
Right, from my friends, yeah.
What happened then? Who else remained there when this was all transpired? Just you and Mr. Dahmer, or you, Mr. Dahmer, and others?
After it all had transpired, it was me and Mr. Dahmer in the cab, you know, leaving.
You met up at about 6 o'clock, 6:15. What time is it now, at this time?
It's maybe 6:30 as we get to 26th in Wisconsin.
So you stop at 26th in Wisconsin, and what happens there?
Okay, we get out the cab then, and then he suggested he go to the store and get cigarettes before he went to his apartment.
And after he did that, did you go to his apartment?
Yeah.
What route?
Through the alleys, through the back way. We entered the back.
Was there any discussion as to why you were taking that route?
Said it was safer, people wouldn't bother us or whatever.
At the time that you were walking with him towards his apartment, what was your plans on doing when you got to the apartment?
Really drinking the beer, I wasn't really sure if I was going to pose or not, you know. Yep, I wasn't really sure at that point. No.
You at least were contemplating maybe you would.
Yeah, I was going to make up my mind once I got there, whatever, you know.
Were you in need of money?
Yeah, I just started working, and the offer sounded good at that time.
Okay. Now, when you got to his apartment, how was he acting? Tell us about his... tell me about his demeanor. You know what I mean by that, Mr. Edwards?
Yes,
How was
I
he
understand.
acting?
Just like a normal, everyday person, you know, friendly, good conversationalist. He was talking about the military, things of that nature. Yeah.
Had you been in the military?
My father retired in the Air Force, so I've been to several different bases. I was born on an Army base in Fort Carson.
And that's the kind of thing you were talking to him
It's
about.
like a family thing, you know, so I know a lot about it.
Had he been drinking alcohol?
Yeah, I consumed some. He was drinking beer at the time when I first
Well,
met.
the time that you were like going to his apartment, was he intoxicated?
No.
Had he been drinking?
Yeah, I've been drinking a couple of beers.
How about you? Were you intoxicated?
No, not at all.
Had you had something to drink?
I sipped maybe a little beer, my friend's beer, that was it.
All right, now you get to the apartment. Do you go in the back way?
Yes, correct.
You went up to the apartment. Tell us what happens when you get up to the apartment. Tell us what you observed, what your senses told you.
Okay, first of all, it seemed like a normal apartment. When we got inside, he turned off burglar alarms. I asked him why. First, it was a foul odor, okay?
Tell us about that. What kind of an odor?
It was just like an odor. I didn't quite know what it was. You know, he told me a sewer pipe had broke and management would take care of it. You know.
And did you accept that?
Yes, because I worked around at construction companies before, and when pipes bust, sewer pipes bust, they smell, you know.
Okay.
So I brought that.
So you say your first thing you did was notice the odor. He opened the door to the apartment?
Yes.
And you walked in?
Yes.
He turned off something. What did he turn off?
Alarms.
Did you ask him about that?
Yeah, and he said the part of the neighborhood he was in, he was protecting his property, things like that, cameras, VCRs, TVs, things of that nature.
Did you accept that?
Yes, I did.
After getting in the apartment, can you generally describe the apartment, both the apartment that you saw then and the apartment that you, the other parts of the apartment you saw? Tell the jury what the apartment was like.
It was like normal, pretty decent apartment, had nice things in it. You know, it had certain boxes sitting on the front, neurotic acid boxes. I asked him about it. He said he cleaned bricks with those, you know, which you can use that type of acid to clean bricks, so I brought that also.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said. You asked him about some boxes?
Yeah, that were laying in the front living room floor.
And what did he tell you about those?
That he cleaned brick with the neurotic acid.
Okay. Now, was the apartment small, large, medium? Give us the size.
Kind of medium size, yeah.
All right. Now, did you, when you went in there, you went in, as you entered, were you in the living room?
Yes.
And what was the living room? What did you see in there? The boxes you told us about?
The boxes is a couch. There's a fish tank there also. A black lamp. Yeah, there was a little table-like on the left side.
Could you see a refrigerator? Or?
Yeah, I could see the refrigerator on my left.
Was it close to the living room?
Yeah, maybe 8 feet from the living room.
And so it was just off the living room?
Right.
Now, did you stay in that room, or did you go to another room right away?
We stayed in that room for a while.
And where did you sit, if you did?
Okay, at the end of the sofa like I am now, this is a sofa. I was at this end, and he was at this side.
Referring to the jury, I mean, the witness box, if that were a sofa, he would be at that end. That is the end where he's seated on the witness stand, which would be the part closest to the judge. Is that right?
That's correct.
And where did Mr. Dahmer, what did he do?
He sat like here, maybe a couple feet from me.
Not
on my
close
left.
to you?
Maybe 2 feet.
You in fear of anything at that time?
Not at all.
Okay, and what did the two of you do?
Okay, he said we were still talking, chatting, you know. He asked me, was I interested in doing the photography? You know, I told him I was still contemplating, so therefore he offered me a beer and a rum and coke mixture at that point.
Now, you're fully clothed.
Yes.
Okay, and you're sitting on a couch.
Right.
And he talks to you about this posing, and you weren't sure you're going to do it.
Right.
How much had you been offered to do the posing?
$100.
Okay. And when he brings you the beer, he brings you rum and coke?
Yeah, he brings the beer first, and then he brings the rum and coke.
How big of a glass?
Maybe that big. Yeah.
About 4 inches high?
About 4 inches, yeah, 3.5, something like that.
Did you ever taste it?
Yeah, I took a few sips.
Was it strong, weak, medium, or just about right?
I'm not a big liquor drinker, so it didn't taste that good to me.
Didn't taste good to you? You don't know if it was strong or not?
Strong or not, no, because I'm... Okay.
What did Mr. Dahmer do? Did he likewise have a drink?
No, I think, yeah, right, a beer, but I don't think he drank all of his drink at that time.
Did he have any rum with him?
I just noticed the beer. right.
What time are we talking about now that you're sitting on the couch and you get the beer? You got over there about what time and how long after this?
It was about before 7, quarter to 7, something like that.
So you're sitting on the couch, he brings you a beer and rum and coke, what happens?
Okay, then we just study talking and everything, you know.
General talk?
General talk. Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, then I was just, I don't know, getting a little agitated maybe, you know, because of the smell and things. And then he threw my conversation off talking about the fish in the fish tank, you know.
Okay, when you start talking about the fish in the fish tank, do you bring that up or does he?
He does.
And what do you do when he does that?
I turn to the right, like the fish tank is here, I'm turning all the way over here.
You turn to your right to look at it?
To look at the fish tank, right.
And when that happens, what happens to you?
All of a sudden a handcuff and a knife is pulled on me. Yeah.
Handcuff is placed on your body? Where?
On my left wrist.
And you see a knife?
Yeah, the knife, yeah.
Now, at that moment, what do you do?
First I feel fear, then I ask him what's going on, you know. This is not necessary, you know, to pull a knife on me at that point.
Are you afraid?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to know why he did that?
None whatsoever.
Did you have any idea at that time it was going to happen?
No.
Tell me about his demeanor at that time when you looked and realized he had a knife and you in a cuff. What was, you were only cuffed on one wrist?
One wrist, yeah.
What was happening to the other part of the handcuff?
Okay, he had it in his hand.
He was holding it?
Holding that in the wrist, yeah.
Where was the knife? In the other hand?
The knife was like he had here, the knife was in his hand, he had it on me like this.
Let the record reflect he was holding the knife in his right hand as he showed it, holding the cuff in his left hand, is that right?
Right.
And your left hand is cuffed?
Yeah, right.
Where do you have the knife? What kind of a knife was it?
It was like a military knife, a machete or some type. Yeah, he had it lowered right up under my rib cage, you know. Like
so
in
he
the
had
back, somewhere in the back here.
He had it pointed at your rib cage?
Yeah.
Did you feel it, touch
yeah,
it?
Yeah, he had it on me. He had it against my body.
What happened? What was going through your mind the moment that happened when you realized you had a knife at your side and a handcuff on your hand? What did you think?
I think, like, you know, what's going on, you know? This guy is so nice, and all of a sudden, you know, it's like he's pulling knives and handcuffs and all on me, you know?
What'd you do? What'd you say to him?
I asked him what the problem was, you know, that it's not necessary to do this, you know?
What'd he say?
He told me at that point if I wouldn't do what he said, he would kill me, yeah.
Now, tell us about his demeanor at the time that you look at him and you say, what's going on? You don't have to do this. What happens to Mr. Dahmer? What's he like?
It's like not the same person that we met at Grand Avenue Mall.
How does he different?
His face structure seemed different, you know. His body structure is like it wasn't him anymore, you know. It's like it was a totally different guy there.
So he told you if you didn't do what he told you to do, he'd hurt you?
He'd hurt me.
What'd you do? What happened? Tell us what happened step by step as best you can remember.
And then all of a sudden he kind of calms down, you know. And then he said he has the key in the bedroom, so we proceed to the bedroom.
The key to the handcuffs?
Right. Yeah.
So you believed he was going to take them off?
Yeah. At that point, I had to go along with this guy, you know. And then if I had to find out, so I walked back there with him. He kind of guides me back there, you know.
Guides you back with the cuff and the knife?
Yeah, right.
And you go into the bedroom?
Right.
What do you see in the bedroom?
A big, about 50, 60-gallon drum barrel, whatever.
Do you ever see a 50, 60 drum barrel in anybody's bedroom before?
Not at all.
Do you have any idea? Did you ask him what it was?
No. At that point, I asked no questions at that time. Yeah.
Was there a bed in that room?
Yes.
How was the bed? Was it made, unmade? What did
it was unmade.
What did you see on the bed, if anything?
Something like a stain of whatever, yeah, on the bed.
What did you think it was?
At that point in time, I wasn't sure.
What did you do when you got in the bedroom as he's holding on to the cuff and the knife? What did you do?
Studied us talking, trying to be friends with him, you know.
Did you remain standing? Did you sit down?
He made me sit down at that point. We both sit on the bed.
Was it at the foot of the bed, side of the bed, head of the bed?
Maybe halfway between.
Did that room have a TV set in it?
Yes.
Was there anything going on the TV?
Yeah, the Exorcist movies was playing at that time.
There was an Exorcist movie on?
Yeah.
You know which one of them?
The name I'm not sure. I think it's 3. I'm not sure which one. Right.
So there was a movie. Did you know it to be part of television or a VCR?
VCR. Normally that's not on regular television, so I thought it was VCR.
You knew there was a movie showing.
Right.
Did you see him put it on, or was it on?
No. When we first got into the apartment, he went through the back to the back bedroom. Maybe he put it on then. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then what happened? You're both sitting on the bed?
Yes.
Are you still in handcuffs?
Yes.
Is he holding the handcuff?
Right.
Do you still have the knife?
Right.
Is it pointed at your side, as you've told us before?
Right.
You trying to be cool?
Very much so.
You're not fighting with him?
No.
What's your intention? What are you planning on doing?
Getting away. I was contemplating on at the point jumping out the window. Yep. I was basically talking with this person, trying to let him know I was his friend. Yeah.
As you were sitting there on the bed, when he had you by the handcuff and a knife at your side, at that time, which would have been maybe 7 o'clock?
Something like that.
What impression was made upon your mind by the conduct, action, manner, expression, and conversation that you observed of Mr. Dahmer?
His frame of mind is what you want to know, right? Okay, he acted, at times he would go through like different changes with me, you know?
Tell us about that.
1 minute he's like nice, then he was telling he didn't want people to leave him or abandon him, things of this nature, you know? Yeah.
Well, what did you think about him as a person? What impression was made on your mind of this fellow that you're dealing with here?
Yeah, that at times he wasn't himself, and then at times he was like a nice guy, you know? He would come and go different times, you know, throughout the whole time. Then he would like sit, being quiet at times, watching a movie, wanting me to watch the movie, you know, and just doing little chanting sounds, you know.
Did you observe him watching the movie and how he would react to the movie?
Right, he would like just start rocking back and forth when he, you know, certain parts of the movie or whatever.
You have to say, what did he say, madam?
It was like chanting at certain times and rocking back and forth, right?
Tell us about his chanting. What was that all about?
I'm not even sure, sir, but it was just like, I can't tell you the words. I couldn't understand what he was saying at that time.
Can you mimic him? How it sounded?
It was like a slow slur, like, some of that nature, some close like that, I'm not sure.
Did it keep on for a period of time?
Off and on throughout the ordeal.
And how about the movement back and forth? How was that being effectuated?
Just like back and forth, he would do it every now and then. You know?
Just as you are rocking in your chair?
Like this.
And chanting?
And chanting.
Was there any parts of the movie that was going on that you saw that he said anything about?
It was like the part about the preacher that used to be a preacher that had got possessed, and that it would seem like he was like interested in that part. That part had his attention more than anything. You know?
Well, tell us about what you mean by that. What impressions were made upon your mind when this was going on as to had his attention? How did he appear to you?
It appeared like it was like he wanted to mimic it or be like that part, you know, being demonized or whatever in that nature.
I'm sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, like he wanted that type of movie, that part, certain parts of that part interested him, you know. It was like he changed with it at times. Then he would get more aggressive, try to get me to handcuff myself, both hands, and he's told me it made him feel more dominant at that time.
Okay, did you and he move off of the bed at any time?
Yes, he wanted me to lay flat down, stomach down on the floor at that time.
Did you at any time go to the bathroom, use the washroom, prior to the time that he asked you to lay down on the floor?
No.
All right, tell us what happened how did that happen, that he told you to lay down on the floor?
No, he told me to lay down, face down, put both of my hands behind my back, because he changed again at that point, like he got more aggressive at that time.
Okay, now, but tell us, did he still have the knife out?
Yes, he still had the knife with him.
And what did you do?
Okay, I kind of like laid on my sides. For some reason, I guess God told me not to lay flat down or let this person handcuff me, so I didn't.
So you were trying to stop that from happening, but you got down on the floor.
Right.
What did he do?
He kind of laid across me, put his head across my chest at that point.
And what was he doing with his head?
Pardon me?
What did it appear to you he was doing with his head? What was he trying to do?
Like he was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point.
He said he was going to eat your heart?
Yes, that's correct.
Did he still have the knife?
Yeah.
Where was the knife pointed?
When I was on the floor, he had it pointed at my groin area at that time.
One knife?
He had several, and then he slipped one. I managed to slide one underneath the bed. And I guess during a point of time through an ordeal, he didn't know where the knife was, so I didn't know if he felt that was a threat or not.
So he still had a knife, you're on the floor. How long does he lay on top of you trying to hear your heart as you've described it?
Maybe a minute, minute and a half.
And then what did you do then?
I knew something was about to happen, so I suggested that I go to the bathroom. I had to use the bathroom at that time.
And what did he do?
He kind of guided me to the bathroom.
So when you say he guided, you still had hold of your handcuff?
Yes.
And you went to the bathroom?
Right.
Did you urinate?
Yeah.
Were you able to utilize your own zipper, or did he touch you at all?
Touched me in no way. Didn't attempt to look. He just held me in back, you know.
So in other words, he didn't try to look at what your penis looked like or anything?
Not at all.
So after urinating, did you think that you were going to be the victim of, did he ask to engage in any homosexual acts with you?
None whatsoever.
Okay, so now you leave the bathroom and what happens?
Okay, then we go back into the bedroom, you know. It was like different time spans. We were talking about him losing his job. Then he would come to the person that I was first with, you know. And then at certain points he would change. You know, at first he was telling me about how people didn't care for him and things of this nature. And I was trying to comfort him, letting him know that I was a friend, you know, that I wasn't going to try to run away from him or nothing like that.
You were being cool.
I guess God, you can say that, because I had no control. I don't know.
Did this continue on for a long period of time during the night?
Yes, apparently so. Time seemed to, I don't know. But I stayed in there that long, so it had to be going on throughout the whole ordeal, which it was. So time just, it happened like that.
And all this time you're trying to hold him down?
Yeah, certain points, right.
How often would he go in and out of these moods?
Sir, at the time spans I couldn't really tell you, but like he would I guess if you want to put it together in time, every 30 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, you know. And then he would have moods of being just silent, you know. And I wouldn't say anything, try to provoke him or say the wrong thing. I would be silent with him.
Okay. So you just let him be alone. Was that movie on the whole time, a long time?
It was on a pretty good period of time, yeah. And when it went off, I couldn't tell you.
Did he continue to chant from time to time?
Yes, it happened several times throughout the ordeal.
Now, when he would watch the movie, did you notice when he would go into this thing that you told us where he would really become fixed on the movie screen? What was happening? How often would that happen?
Throughout the movie, maybe every 15 or 20 minutes, and then he would turn around and try to ask me to put both of my hands behind my back, and I wouldn't, you know, do it. I would talk to him. I'd tell him, you can trust me, you know, you don't have to do this, and that would calm him down a little bit. You know?
He had the knife the whole time.
Right.
He's watching the movie, and he becomes very interested in the movie.
Right.
You don't do anything, just sit there.
Just sit there and be quiet.
And then he would start conversation with you again.
Yeah, he was like you're gonna have to do this and that, you know. Then he told me at a point I was gonna have to kill him, or he was gonna have to kill me at one point.
Were you and he drinking during this time?
No.
So he wasn't running out, bringing you out and getting beers and coming back?
No, I would have been out the window at that point.
Sure.
If he would have.
Did he, when he was fixed, I'm trying to get some words to understand, was he intoxicated?
He had been drinking, but as far as being intoxicated, he was not staggering or anything of that nature.
But you know that some people, when they have too much to drink, change their moods. Was that the kind of mood changes he was having, or a different kind of mood change?
I think this was like more of an inner mood change than an alcoholic mood change.
What kind of mood?
It's like
inner mood?
Yeah, a person change, not alcohol change.
What did you think about this guy? What was going through your mind as to who you were sitting next to, who was doing all these things?
A bizarre individual, someone that was very confused at this time.
Now, there came a time when you went to the washroom again?
Right, I suggested, yeah, because he had started getting aggressive a little bit again. I suggested go to the bathroom. He let me stay in there by myself while he stayed outside the door at that time.
And what happened then?
And then I told him, well, I was contemplating, I was asking God, shall I make my move now? And I was gonna just jump out the window. But when I got out, for some reason, I asked, could I have another beer? Yeah.
And what did he do?
And he reaches over, he guides me over and reaches in and get a beer.
He still got you on the cuff.
Yeah, and then he tells me, I told him I want to sit in the front because it's an air conditioner. I was just going to try to jump out the window or go for the door or whatever, and because the back bedroom didn't have an air conditioner, only in the front. So I suggested we sit on the couch. I had unbuttoned my shirt to try to make him feel more at ease. And then I just sat on the couch and he just started going out of himself again. Yeah.
Going out of himself?
Yeah, he was like paying me no attention at that time.
Like he wasn't there?
He started the chanting again, and it's like just sitting there, And then I just, for some reason, I said, well, I need to go to the bathroom again, and he didn't follow me at that point. So I reached up, I got up, and then I hit him, and I ran out.
So you hit him?
Right.
Did you have any other belongings there?
Yeah, I have my bag right there at the end of the couch. I sit in exactly the same place I sit when I went in there.
So when you got up, he let go of your cuff to let you go to the bathroom again?
He just let me stay there. I was going to go for the window. At that point, he didn't even have the cuff. It's like I wasn't even there anymore.
And when you saw that, what'd you do?
I just seized the opportunity. I said, well, at least I'm going to die trying. I'm not just going to sit here,
What'd you do, son?
I hit him, and I ran towards the door, and he was right there, tried to grab me, get me back in there.
And what happened?
Then I made it outside.
So he wasn't able to bring you back in?
Bring me back in there, no.
He tried?
He tried.
And as you left that apartment, as you got away from him, I'm going to ask you again, what impressions were made on your mind by the conduct of Jeffrey Dahmer, by the actions of Jeffrey Dahmer, by the manner, expressions, and conversations of Jeffrey Dahmer that you observed? Can you give us some words?
It's like I told the policeman that this freak, this crazy guy, was trying to hurt me. Yeah.
Did you run out of the building?
Yes, I did.
Did you summon help?
Yes.
Milwaukee Police Department?
That's correct.
Did they come back there with you to the apartment?
Right.
Did you eventually go back into the apartment with the Milwaukee police officers?
Yes.
And then he was arrested?
Right.
You gave a statement to the Milwaukee police a few hours later?
Yeah, I guess you could say a few hours, yeah.
Mr. Edwards, through your lawyer, I had you come to Wisconsin to testify.
That's correct.
Other than your expenses, you're not being paid anything,
No.
correct? Is that true?
That's true.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you.
Mr. McCann, how long do we anticipate the cross-examination of this witness will
I'd say
take?
at least half an hour, Your Honor.
Okay. That being the case, I think it's appropriate that we take a recess at this time. About 15 minutes. Court's in recess.
All right, please. My next question is why you actually took the lives of your victims.
Yeah, I'd like to know the reason for that too. I don't know.
On le surnomme le cannibale du Milwaukee, ce qui est justifié. Jeffrey Dahmer prenait un plaisir sadique à torturer, puis à manger ses victimes.
I injected another syringe full of that dilute hydrochloric acid, and that's what killed him. I wasn't trying to kill him, but that's what happened.
Enfant dans les années 60, Dahmer se réfugie dans son monde. Son jeu préféré est de tuer de petits animaux, de leur retirer la peau et de nettoyer les os à l'acide.
That's the sort of thing that should raise a flag of concern when we have that sort of behavior, or prolonged torturing of any animal, enjoying that. That's the sadistic element that is of concern, because you're only a step away. Animals can show fear, they can cry, they can scream.
Adolescent, Dahmer se met à boire. Il devient lunatique, introverti, asocial. Peu après la séparation de ses parents en 1978, il frappe pour la première fois. Il prend un adolescent de 19 ans en autostop et a des rapports avec lui. Puis, il lui fracasse le crâne avec un pied de biche. Dahmer traîne ensuite le corps dans un vide sanitaire, le démembre et stocke les morceaux dans des sacs en plastique.
Some of it had to do with loneliness. He didn't want these people to leave, so he killed them to keep them around. I think that was sort of unique, perhaps, to Dahmer.
Dahmer commence alors à hanter les bars gays de Milwaukee et de Chicago à la recherche de victimes. Ce sont toujours des hommes jeunes, noirs pour la plupart.
Somehow the violence and sexuality got paired. Violence itself becomes eroticized, and that becomes the exciting part of it.
Plus tard, Dahmer confiera naïvement ses méthodes dans une déposition à l'avocat Robert Slattery. C'est une vidéo inédite à la télévision.
He would make offers to lure young men by offering them money.
Sometimes, yes.
And what you'd offer them money for is for the taking of pictures.
Occasionally.
You'd also offer them drinks. Your answer is yes?
Right.
And you didn't necessarily propose a sexual encounter, but you hoped that it would lead in that direction.
Right.
The other procedure that you utilized was to drill holes through the bone, through the skull of your victims?
Yes.
What did you inject into the hole?
Sometimes hot water, sometimes a weak acid solution.
What sort of acid?
Hydrochloric.
Now, what was the purpose of that drilling technique now?
To put the person in a sort of zombie-like state. I didn't know exactly what it would do, but I was experimenting, if you will.
What do you mean when you say a zombie-like state? What are you
State
trying
where
to
he would be willing to just follow my orders and not want to leave.
La série de meurtres de Dahmer s'étale sur 13 ans. Elle se termine en juillet 1992, toujours à Milwaukee. Dahmer menotte une nouvelle victime dans son appartement. Mais l'homme de 32 ans parvient à s'échapper. Il conduit la police chez Dahmer. Ils y trouvent les restes de 13 cadavres, dont des têtes humaines dans le réfrigérateur.
You would murder them and decompose them, you cannibalized them. There were photos of them and the most ghastly things that you could ever imagine happening to a human being that Dahmer did to his victims.
En février 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer, 31 ans, est reconnu coupable de 15 meurtres. À l'époque, on s'arrache déjà cette étrange histoire.
Everybody was trying to do a Dahmer thing, you know. It was sick, disgusting, exploited for money. Book writers, movie makers. It's okay for them to make money, but God forbid that the families of the victims should get anything for what happened to them.
Jacobson lance un procès civil contre Dahmer. Le juge attribue aux familles une somme totale de 120 millions de dollars pour préjudices moraux. Mais d'où vient cet argent? Sûrement pas de la poche de Dahmer.
We had actually, in LA, arranged with some writers, and how we were going to do it was that Jeffrey Dahmer would be interviewed face-to-face and filmed. And basically, for his first-person story rights, you know, Jeffrey, how'd you get to be such a sick individual that did so many demented, disgusting things with your victims? You know, that story was worth $1 million.
Dahmer refuse de parler. Jacobson a alors une autre idée. Il est difficile d'y croire.
We knew that the 311 items that were confiscated by the police from Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, which included the vat that he used to boil down his victims, the hypodermic needle he used to lobotomize his victims, the cutting utensils he used to cut up his victims, the acids he used, and the lava lamp, everything else that was in that apartment would have a value.
Le même juge décrète que les familles des victimes ont le droit de saisir la propriété personnelle de Dahmer.
So that was our plan. We were going to have a Jeffrey Dahmer auction and sell off to the highest bidder all of Jeffrey Dahmer's assets.
Plus troublant encore, les chaînes de télé du monde entier se bousculent pour filmer les enchères en exclusivité. Mais l'idée est jugée révoltante, surtout à Milwaukee.
What ultimately happened there was that Joe Zober, who is a philanthropist, wealthy property owner in Milwaukee, did not want to see something like that happen. He did not want a Jeffrey Dahmer auction. He thought it would be terrible for the world, terrible for Milwaukee. He stepped up and ended up, through negotiations, paid us $430,000, which then was divided up amongst all of the victim families. My fee, of course, I gave to charity, and that's how that ended.
Oui, mais la collection morbide est toujours là. Joe Zober finira par faire détruire les biens de Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer mourra en prison, battu à mort par l'un de ses co-détenus. Les criminologues s'accordent sur le fait que Dahmer a le profil de la plupart des tueurs en série, un homme blanc de moins de 35 ans.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I know I will be in prison for the rest of my life. I know that I will have to turn to God to help me get through each day. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a Holocaust. Thank God there will be no more harm that I can do. I believe that only the Lord Jesus Christ can save me from my sins. I have instructed Mr. Boyle to end this matter. I do not want to contest the civil case. I've told Mr. Boyle to try and finalize them if he can. If there is ever any money, I want it to go to the victims' families. I've talked to Mr. Boyle about other things that might help ease my conscience in some way of coming up with ideas on how to make some amends to these families, and I will work with him on that. I want to return to Ohio and quickly end that matter so that I can put all of this behind me and then come right back here to do my sentence. I decided to go through this trial for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was to let the world know that these were not hate crimes. I wanted the world in Milwaukee, which I deeply hurt, to know the truth of what I did. I didn't want unanswered questions. All the questions have now been answered. I wanted to find out just what it was that caused me to be so bad and evil. But most of all, Mr. Boyle and I decided that maybe there was a way for us to tell the world that if there are people out there with these disorders, maybe they can get some help before they end up being hurt or hurting someone. I think the trial did that. I take all the blame for what I did. I hurt many people. The judge in my earlier case tried to help me, and I refused his help, and he got hurt by what I did. I hurt those policemen in the Conorak matter, and I shall ever regret causing them to lose their jobs, and I hope and pray that they can get their jobs back because I know they did their best, and I just plain fooled them. For that, I am so sorry. I know I hurt my probation officer, who was really trying to help me. I am so sorry for that, and sorry for everyone else that I have hurt. I have hurt my mother and father and stepmother. I love them all so very much. I hope that they will find the same peace I am looking for. Mr. Boyle's associates, Wendy and Ellen, have been wonderful to me, helping me through this worst of all times. I want to publicly thank Mr. Boyle. He didn't need to take this case, but when I asked him to help me find the answers and to help others, if I could, he stayed with me and went way overboard in trying to help me. Mr. Boyle and I agreed that it was never a matter of trying to get off. It was only a matter of which place I would be housed the rest of my life, not for my comfort, but for trying to study me in the hopes of helping me and learning to help others who might have problems. I know I will be in prison. I pledge to talk to doctors who might be able to find some answers. In closing, I just want to say that I hope God has forgiven me. I know society will never be able to forgive me. I know the families of the victims will never be able to forgive me for what I have done. I promise I will pray each day to ask for their forgiveness when the hurt goes away, if ever. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry. Your Honor, I know that you are about to sentence me. I ask for no consideration. I want you to know that I have been treated perfectly by the deputies who have been in your court and the deputies who work the jail. The deputies have treated me very professionally, and I want everyone to know that. They have not given me special treatment. Here is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of who I am the worst. But for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor, and I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. I ask for no consideration.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I understand you have arrived at verdicts in this manner.
In a 10-2 decision, the jury found Jeffrey Dahmer legally sane. Some relatives of Dahmer's victims sat quietly in court, others cried. Prior to his sentencing, they were allowed to express themselves before the judge.
Jeffrey, I hate you! I hate you! Nothing's out of control! Don't Jeffrey, I'll kill you! Look at me, motherfucker! I can kill you!
Punch and refast.
I can kill you!
Once order was restored, Dahmer spoke publicly for the first time.
I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry.
Many questioned the emotional depth of Dahmer's apology, whether a man who killed so routinely had the conscience to feel remorse. The judge sentenced Dahmer to a 937-year prison term, but it would last only a few tormented years. Jeffrey Dahmer's final home was the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His former residence at the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee stood as a painful reminder of the lives that ended there. So in November 1992, it was demolished. In his prison cell at the age of 32, Dahmer's life became a conflicted introspection, trying to sort out the blame for his killing nature.
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
He is pure evil, but you'd never know it by looking at him. But when you hear him, that's another story. His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade. But how could any of this happen? For the first time ever, Nancy Glass is here inside the world of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Bill, when I sat down opposite Jeffrey Dahmer for this interview, I wondered what he would tell me, how hard it would be to get him to discuss his horrific crimes. What I found was that he was very forthcoming. He volunteered details that may be difficult to hear. I began by asking what he wanted from the men he picked up.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls, and skeletons.
Jeffrey Dahmer is recalling his monstrous past. Almost 2 years ago in this little apartment in Milwaukee, police discovered the grisly remnants of one of the most horrible crime sprees in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts. He instantly became the center of worldwide media attention, a serial killer unmasked. There were protests and press conferences in Milwaukee as people tried to understand how this could have happened in their midst. How did Jeffrey Dahmer get away with murder after murder for 13 years? How did a boy born into a hard-working middle-class family turn into the worst kind of monster imaginable? In this exclusive interview, we put those questions to Jeffrey Dahmer himself. We met with him at the maximum security prison where he is serving his sentence of 999 years. For the first time, he talks about his crimes and gives us a chilling look inside the mind of a serial killer.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to get away with his crimes was because of just what you are seeing here. Jeffrey Dahmer is intelligent and articulate. That is what makes him so frightening. But if you listen carefully to his words throughout this interview, you realize it is a thin disguise. You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong. I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
The hitchhiker's name was Stephen Hicks. He was just 18. Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There he strangled him with a barbell. He dismembered the body and hid it in a drain pipe. It was Jeffrey Dahmer who gave those details to the police in his confession.
No one had a clue as to what was happening for over a decade.
During that time, Jeffrey Dahmer joined the Army and was sent to Germany. He was eventually discharged for a drinking problem and returned to Ohio. 9 years after Stephen Hicks' murder, the killing began again. What happened to you in the 9 years in between that you were able to stop, that you were able to control yourself?
It just wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then. And I started, when I moved to Milwaukee in '81, I started reading pornography, going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory of it?
I have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Dahmer says he snuck the corpse of his victim, Stephen Toomey, out of his hotel room in a suitcase. Then he took it to his grandmother's house, where he cut up the body and put it in plastic garbage bags. When you killed these men, afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
But Jeffrey Dahmer was out of control. The urge to kill had overpowered him. As police later learned, he wasn't satisfied with his victim's death. He wanted more. Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep if I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial, a point where I could, I don't know, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque, what have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street naked and bleeding. Dahmer convinced the police that he and the boy were simply having a lover's quarrel.
It's an intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
How old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
After the police left, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered that boy, Conorak Synthesomphone. This man says he had a near-fatal encounter with Jeffrey Dahmer.
He wanted to take some picture of my back. He hit me with a rubber hammer on my neck.
He was lucky to escape because by then the killing had become almost routine. Before you went out to pick up a man, was there any kind of ritual you went through?
I'd go to the nightclubs, drink, watch the striptease shows, and if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
Watching the movie Exorcist III was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I had tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
While Jeffrey Dahmer may say things today that make it seem like he understands what went on in his mind, he does not. All he can do is tell you what happened, but he cannot stop whatever it is that drove him to kill in the first place. Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
Jeffrey Dahmer says as time went on, his mind became more and more warped, and yet he was clever enough to continue to elude police and lure young men to his apartment. We should warn you, the details are very graphic.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17 young men. In time, his desires became more extreme, his deeds more grotesque. Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive by inducing a zombie-like state. By injecting first dilute acid solution into their brain or hot water, and it never did completely work.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
He became so warped by his evil impulses that he even took a victim's head with him to work at the Ambrosia chocolate factory.
I kept the mummified head and skull of one of the victims in a carrying case in my locker at work.
Were you almost flaunting it?
Yes, but that's how strong the compulsion was. That's how bizarre the desire was. I wanted to keep something of the person with me.
Jeffrey Dahmer exhibited some disturbing behavior early on. He began drinking heavily as a teenager, dropped out of college, was arrested for indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and fondling a 13-year-old boy. Tragically, one of his murder victims would be that boy's brother. Do you know what started it? Was there any kind of incident that you can remember?
To this day, I don't know what started it. And the person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point. I hit him, and I ran.
What was the turning point for you that made you suddenly realize that you had done something terribly wrong, something you should be sorry for?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him." And I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
When it was revealed that most of the victims were black or homosexual, people in Milwaukee were incensed. Many felt that was why he went after them and why the police didn't seem to care when their families reported them missing. 10 of your 17 victims were black. Were they racially motivated?
It was not racially motivated. It was not sexual preference. It was just to find an obsession with the best-looking young man I could find.
While you just heard him say that his sexual preference had nothing to do with the killings, he has not come to terms with his homosexuality.
Never understood it. There was no use trying to fight it because I couldn't rid myself of it. It was too powerful and persistent.
Do you dislike it?
Yes, it's caused a lot of problems for me. A lot of conflicts and unanswered questions.
The conflicts remain with him, and so do his compulsions. But in prison, he finally cannot act on his savage desires. If you were out on the street now, would you still be committing the crimes?
Probably. If this hadn't happened, there's no doubt I probably would be. I can't think of anything that would have stopped me.
He had spent time in church as a boy and with his grandmother as an adult, but had lost his religion during the murder spree. Dahmer placed the blame for the murders on his atheistic beliefs and the theory of evolution.
He said, if it all happens naturalistically, what's the need for a God? Can't I set my own rules? Who owns me? I own myself.
Yet Jeffrey was still a contradiction, for he was always quite willing to blame the devil for taking over his soul. The serial killer wondered now what would happen to him when he died. Dahmer decided he wanted to be baptized. Evangelist Roy Ratcliffe was called by the prison minister to talk with the inmate in April 1994.
He was a very affable, congenial, likable sort of person. I always felt like I was dealing with a small boy in a grown-up man's body. He could get real excited and interested in neat or cool things that a little boy would get involved in.
1 month later, Dahmer was taken to the prison medical center, where he was baptized in a whirlpool.
On the way, we walked by other prisoners who were coming by with mops and brooms and various cleaning devices, and they looked up, and the only one they saw whom they recognized was Jeff, and so they called out in a very friendly, banter, "Hey, JD, how's it going?" And he called back, "I'm going to be baptized, this is great."
Dahmer appeared to be making a remarkable transformation in prison.
He would ask questions. He would say, but wait, what about this? What about that? So uncharacteristic of the earlier years. Go back to senior year in high school, you wouldn't get any of that. He was so interactive and so concerned about our welfare. He was reaching out. He was rehumanizing.
But those dark, haunted fantasies remained with Dahmer.
I'll probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings.
Dahmer got another reminder of his past when he was visited by Teresa Smith. Jeffrey had killed her brother, Eddie.
First thing when he did when he came in is apologize for killing my brother. I asked him why my brother, and he said he seen the way he danced, and he liked the way he looked. And he said I was just attracted to him. He said he had strangled him. And then he was trying some new experiment or something with preserving the skull and the body and whatever, and it didn't work. So he had to destroy him.
Dahmer had spent his entire adult life as the predator. But now in prison, he became the prey. The notorious serial killer was a target for other inmates. In August 1994, he was attacked in the prison chapel with a crudely fashioned knife. He survived.
On the night of July 22nd, 1991, Milwaukee police finally discovered the horrendous secrets that Jeffrey Dahmer had been desperately hiding for many years. Acting on a tip from a young gay man who escaped from Dahmer's apartment, police searched number 213 and found a chamber of unimaginable horrors. Human heads and a heart wrapped and bagged in the freezer. Hands and feet at the bottom of his soup kettle. Skulls tucked away in a file cabinet. And this blue barrel stuffed with dismembered torsos soaking in acid. Dahmer would spend the next 24 hours confessing, telling in vivid detail of a murder spree that began in 1978 when he was 18 and ended with 17 young men dead.
I had this reoccurring fantasy of meeting a hitchhiker on the road and of taking him hostage and doing what I wanted with him. And I never in my wildest nightmares thought that it would become a reality.
Why would Dahmer have, as he put it, created his own Holocaust? How did he become so filled with evil? It would be comforting to point to an abusive childhood, an early life filled with hatred or horror, but his was filled with love.
Jeff was the most beautiful, darling, sweetest baby, the nicest young boy.
There just were no real signs when he was growing up.
Imagine your child grows up to be a murderer. Would you still love him? Would the guilt and sense of responsibility be overwhelming? Jeffrey Dahmer's parents have struggled mightily to understand what might have gone wrong with their child. His father's search for an explanation led him to look inward, even to write a book simply titled A Father's Story. But his search may be in vain, because even the experts and profilers who've studied serial killers are baffled by why they do it.
There doesn't seem to be any indication in any of the serial murderers that something external makes them want to kill. It's as if something is thrown, a switch is thrown, and they begin on the pattern of what their pattern will be.
Maybe all we can do is what Lionel Dahmer did, look back and try to see what went wrong. As a young child at the beach with his parents, Jeffrey Dahmer discovered a dead crab. He examined it with a child's curiosity, but later the curiosity grew into something unthinkable.
All I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like. There may have been some violence involved, some underlying subconscious feelings of violence. It was a compulsion, became a compulsion.
Jeffrey Dahmer got bigger, and so did his compulsion to look at the insides of living things. He began to kill them, satisfying powerful urges that he didn't understand.
In 9th grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it, and I just started branching out, dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy, but it didn't. It veered off into this.
More and more, Dahmer killed animals in the woods behind his house. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't stop. Then, at 14 or 15, it got worse.
I don't know, it became a compulsion, and it switched from animals to humans. I still don't understand it. I don't know why.
If your fantasy life as a teenager includes killing, who do you tell?
From about 15 years on up, a great deal of my thoughts were basically unshareable with anyone. So I just closed myself off and just put on a mask of normalcy.
As Jeffrey Dahmer entered adolescence, his secrets multiplied. He began to feel attracted to other young men. It was not an issue he could talk to his father about, but Jeffrey knew he was gay.
Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't.
And just as Jeffrey was becoming aware of his internal violent sexual urges, his external life began to unravel. His parents' marriage, which had been rocky throughout his childhood, finally ended. He found himself alone more and more. And then one night, while his mother was away on a trip and his father newly moved into a motel down the street, a fantasy Jeffrey had been having for years came true, and the killing began.
I was 18 years old, driving home. I saw this hitchhiker about a mile from my house, and he caught my eye. I drove past him, thought to myself, should I stop and pick him up, or should I just keep on going? I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. I turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality. It just seems so bizarre to me that this obsession that I had been thinking about and wanting, just all the parts are there, and they make it possible to make it happen, just at the time when it could happen, when there's nobody at the house for 2 weeks.
After the first time he murdered, Dahmer says that he tried to get control of himself, and for 6 years he did not kill again. In 1984, he found himself living in Milwaukee, frequenting gay bars, when the violent sexual urges overcame him again.
I met this guy at one of the bars, downtown Milwaukee bars. We went back to the hotel, just planning on getting drunk. I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him unconscious, and was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed.
This type of behavior and the urge that develops, it's triggered. It doesn't go in cycles. It may be a place that he's in that reminds him of something. It may be something that he hears. It may be a certain season. It may just be a color. It's intimately connected with memory and previous experiences and something that goes on at an unconscious level.
Whatever it was, it came over Dahmer almost like a dream.
I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have. And that's when it all started again. I had no intention of hurting him at all.
How could Dahmer not remember? It's hard for a normal person to imagine, but Dr. Helen Morrison believes that the brain functioning of serial murderers is unique.
Part of his mind is split off. Again, we have this piece of this puzzle that's somewhere that doesn't connect with the thinking part or the logical part. It's not far removed from those of us who drive every day, and we drive the same route, and we don't know how we got from point A to point B. We know we did it, but it doesn't enter our consciousness.
Unlike other serial killers who seem to actually derive satisfaction from the killing, Jeffrey Dahmer says he did not. His motivation, his objective was sexual. He wanted to create a sexual slave that he could totally control, and to that end, he performed the most horrific of experiments on his victims, literally drilling holes in their head.
I tried to create living zombies with uric acid in the drill, but it never worked. No, the killing wasn't the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control to do with as I wanted.
Dr. Helen Morrison, who profiles these men, says part of the reason is because serial killers like Dahmer literally feel things differently than a normal person.
To the serial murderer, it's very similar to the young child who may pull the legs off of a daddy long legs or a fly to see what happens. There is no humanity there. It's just, oh, this is a very interesting thing. They do things to individuals that they've never experienced themselves. They want to see pain, or they want to see fear, or they want to see agony.
And with Dahmer, that experimenting included what had to be the most shocking part of this case. He sometimes ate his victims, an idea abhorrent to anyone with even vaguely human sensibilities. And yet, here again, Dr. Morrison says that, in fact, Dahmer's behavior makes a peculiar kind of psychological sense.
Jeffrey Dahmer was not the only individual who was a cannibal or bit his victims or used teeth as a weapon. If you remember about infancy, if we go purely psychologically, the only way an infant interacts with his world around him is through touch, feel, and teeth. And this is a way that babies explore their world with their mouths. That's what they use. That's how they relate to the world. And what is evident in all of the serial murderers is this trait of very oral or mouthing or biting or eating, ingesting, which is highly infantile, but it seems to be a way in which they can be with their victim.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
By the late 80s, Dahmer had spiraled completely into a free fall of killing. A serial killer was on the loose in Milwaukee, but why wasn't anyone noticing? Serial killer profiler Robert Ressler says it was easy for Dahmer to hide.
He was fairly good looking and very shy. And I think I've often said that in any college group, you could put him right in the middle of a college group, and probably you would look at him as a decent young man.
And that was Dahmer's most powerful weapon in luring his victims into his world. 17 in total. They had several traits in common. They were all men, all young, mostly minorities, and almost all were gay. Starting in 1984, one by one, these men disappeared. But nobody in Milwaukee had any idea that a serial killer was on the loose. Annie Schwartz is a crime reporter for the Waukesha Freeman newspaper in Milwaukee.
It was very much business as usual before Jeffrey Dahmer was caught. Because of the nature of the victims, the kinds of people that he chose, they were people that for the most part weren't missed by their families. They were often people who were tossed aside by their families because they were gay or they had had problems with the police. He chose his victims very carefully. He chose people that wouldn't be missed.
If families were not missing the victims, Jeffrey Dahmer's family was missing clues that something was terribly wrong. There were close calls, like this one with his father, Lionel.
I had a box in my bedroom closet, and it contained the mummified head and genitals of a young man I met in one of the bars down in Milwaukee. And it was a locked metal box. My dad one week came to visit and happened to see it, and he was wondering what was in it. He didn't know. Nobody knew. I told him it was pornography, some magazines. And he wasn't satisfied with that answer. We got into a bit of an argument because I wouldn't open it up. He took the locked box down to the basement and was about to smash it open. But I came back in the house. We reconciled.
The reconciliation with his father would mean the lies would go on and that Jeffrey Dahmer would continue to hunt down victims in the gay bars of Milwaukee and kill them. But in a city with a relatively low crime rate, why were the police not connecting the murders? Dahmer's seeming normality helped him hide his reign of terror.
People like Dahmer can get away with this easier because law enforcement does not recognize him for what he is. They're looking for somebody who's dragging their knuckles on the pavement and baying at the moon with hair in their face. They're not looking for Mr. Nice Guy, the quiet young man living in the neighborhood.
But there may have been something more to why the murders went unnoticed.
Okay, hi, I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt. And I ain't got no quarter on him. I just seen him, and he needs some help.
Where is he at?
On 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
He's just on the corner at the street?
Yeah, he in the middle of the street. He fell out. We trying to help him. Some people trying to help him.
Okay, and he's unconscious right now?
He getting him up, but he is bruised up. Somebody must have jumped on him and stripped him or whatever.
The call is about this young man, Conorak Synthesin phone. The voice is that of a neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, who spotted the young man trying to escape Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer had already tried to perform his crude sex zombie experiment on the 14-year-old, drilling a hole in his head and pouring in acid. Drugged, bleeding, dazed, the young man had somehow managed to get away from Dahmer and yell for help. The police did come. Jeffrey Dahmer told the police that Synthesin phone was his 19-year-old lover with whom he'd been quarreling. The police went into Dahmer's apartment, saw nothing amiss, and returned the boy. The police then radioed back to the station, joking about what they had seen.
The intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend. My partner's going to get deloused at the station.
A month later, when Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, he admitted to killing Synthesymphone shortly after police left. The death would cost the two police officers their jobs and would force the entire city to look inward at attitudes and treatment of minorities and gays. There would be candlelight vigils and city-decreed days of healing, but Jeffrey Dahmer would leave a black mark on Milwaukee.
The place where Dahmer's apartment building stood was raised and put a playground in. Raised all kinds of money from the community, and no one in the community wanted to use this playground because they said it was the devil's playground. I think that the city of Milwaukee, at the end of the Jeffrey Dahmer case, was left with the unfortunate realization that it can happen here. It being whatever horrific thing that you see on the news that you think happens in other places and to other people. There was the sad realization for people that live in the city of Milwaukee that it could and did happen here.
But of course, the deepest scars would be reserved for the victims' families and the family of the murderer.
Never, Jeffrey! Jeffrey! I hate you! That is out of control! Don't with me, Jeffrey! I'll kill you! Look at me!
You took my mother's oldest grandchild from her, and for that I can never forgive you. I hope you can deal with what you've done.
The families of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims had their day in court and an opportunity to address him. Jeffrey Dahmer sat motionless throughout. His father, Lionel, sat behind him. Jeffrey's crimes had been a terrible shock for him, so much so that for the first 24 hours after he learned of them, he didn't believe Jeffrey's confession.
How can you see your son who's been riding a tricycle and running around with his dog Frisky and playing tennis with me, taking a knife and cutting a person open, and then doing sexual things with it? It's pretty hard.
Those who profile serial killers can understand why Lionel would have such trouble reconciling his baby boy with the adult killer who would perpetrate such sickening crimes.
We do know that when puberty comes, the ages of 13, 14, 15, that the hormones seem to interact with the brain chemistry, and we have no idea what that's doing or where it's coming from.
I think probably there was a mixture of feelings of anger and hate and disappointment and also feeling extremely sorry for what he did. Felt very sorry for victims and their families and also for Jeff, the terrible waste.
Both Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint, Jeffrey's mother, struggled to find a way to support their son in the face of his crimes, a brutal task for any parent to endure.
There's something or things so deeply locked up in his mind that even he doesn't know what's going on, and therefore I have to hug him.
It's almost like I don't have a right to mourn or grieve, because there are all these families who will never, ever speak to their children again.
By all accounts, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed to be relieved that he had been caught. He cooperated thoroughly with authorities and a battery of doctors and profilers who wanted to learn more about his behavior.
What was uncontrollable about Jeffrey Dahmer was the urge. It was the urge he couldn't control. It was the craving he had to satisfy. And that's why when he killed because he couldn't satisfy the urge any other way and had to do it immediately.
And this is something Dahmer seemed to know better than anyone. At his sentencing, he read a statement of apology for his crimes.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both, Now I believe I was sick. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. I know I will be in prison for the rest of my life.
The rest of Jeffrey Dahmer's life would last less than 2 years. In November of 1994, a fellow inmate of Dahmer's beat him to death. The killing occurred in a 20-minute period when the men were unguarded. Although Dahmer expressed repeated remorse for his actions, in the last interview he granted before his death, he made a stunning admission that he still had fantasies of killing.
It never completely goes away. I'll probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings. It's not nearly so bad now that there's no avenues to actually act on it. But no, it never seems to go completely away.
But on November 29th, 1994, inmate Christopher Scarver, who called himself Christ, bludgeoned Dahmer with a metal rod from the prison gym.
Do you remember when you learned that your father murdered Jeffrey Dahmer?
Yeah, it's a big picture of him popped up, and I was just shocked. 10, I saw it on TV, and that's how I found out.
Dahmer died on the way to the hospital. Among his last wishes, Dahmer had asked to be cremated. His ashes were split between his mother and father.
There are statements in his will and testament that say, I don't want a marker, I don't want a grave, I don't want a funeral, I don't want any kind of, he's saying, I want to be wiped out.
But the horrible questions that his life of killing posed do continue, and they defy answers.
Is a mystery of mysteries that will never be solved. Even if he lived, I don't know that what he was all about would ever be solved, except maybes.
It's hard when there's no explanations. Sure, there were red flags in Jeff's life, but no one knew about him. He was so secretive and so careful.